Hey, ang kumalaya sa tinaplan, ditong ante o kaya Brittani Orona. So my name is Brittani Orona. I am an enrolled member of the Hupa Valley Tribe in Northwestern California, and I am really pleased and honored today to kick off the Save California Salmon, Traditional Ecological Knowledge, Science and Management webinar series. And we're really delighted to have everybody here. Before I start the presentation, I just wanted to acknowledge that the land that I am currently on is the Nissenan, Miwok, and Maidu territories of the Sacramento Valley. And I invite you to also consider where you're at, but not just consider, but also to take action and fight for Native justice and for Native lands and life. So today we have a very exciting intro. I will be joined by Ron Reed of the Karuk tribe and Dr. Sibyl Diver of Stanford University to discuss what is traditional ecological knowledge. So before I get started on that as well, there are a few Save California Salmon announcements that I would like to make. So I'm getting my very handy um, notepad, which is my cell phone. So this year is a drought year, and we are facing terrible salmon runs on both the Klamath and the Bay Delta River systems, which are the last large fishable river systems in the state. This means Native people and fishermen will be able to catch very few fish this year. It also means the state and feds need to face hard decisions on water allocations. During the last drought, they chose to provide water to agriculture over fish, and the majority of young salmon died in both river systems. This year, the Trump water allocations are still in play. So we ask that you petition asking the governor to provide more water for fish this upcoming year. And there will be a Zoom meeting on April 21st to ask for the California Water Board to protect salmon in the Sacramento River. And we will be providing links to that today. Also, this year we are offering summer internships for youth and adults. So if you are interested in working with Save California Salmon, please apply. The application is at californiasalmon.org. And again, we'll provide links for that. Our advocacy and water protection in Native California curriculum is now available on the website. So if you joined our last webinar series, you will know that we produced a curriculum. And so that is now live on the Save California Salmon website. And lastly, we decided to provide free education resources, but putting these events on does cost money. So if you are so inclined, please consider donating to Save California Salmon so we can continue to provide these webinars so that we can continue to do advocacy and actions with the help of everybody here. So thank you. And so I'm going to jump into my own presentation on intro to traditional ecological knowledge. And so I am also in addition to serving on the board of Save California Salmon, I am also a PhD candidate in Native American Studies at UC Davis with a designated emphasis in human rights. And I really look at traditional ecological knowledge on the Klamath River Basin and the ways in which we advocate against major state infrastructure projects. So this is just an agenda for the day. So I'll be going first for about 10 minutes, and then I'll pass it over to Ron and Sibyl to go into their presentations. And then if we have time, hopefully we can have 5 minutes of questions. So I also want to introduce my really wonderful co-organizers and collaborators here. So Ron Reed is a traditional dip net fisherman, a cultural biologist, and member of the Karuk tribe. Drawing on his role as a father, a culture bearer, and grassroots leader, Ron has developed plans for eco-cultural revitalization, led youth cultural education camps, and fostered collaborative research at the nexus of traditional ecological knowledge and Western science. Dr. Sibyl Diver is an interdisciplinary environmental scientist and lecturer at Stanford in the Earth Systems program. She does engaged research on indigenous water governance, primarily in Pacific Northwest salmon watersheds. She has worked in partnership with Ron Reed and the Karuk tribe for over 10 years. So I'm super honored to be in conversation with them both it's like being the biggest fan and talking to your heroes here for me. So it's really very exciting. And I'm so pleased that they were both able to join today. So I'm going to go a bit into what traditional ecological knowledge is. There are many different definitions of traditional ecological knowledge, but the one that I always consider and think about is that traditional ecological knowledge is that which is passed down between generations to generation within Indigenous communities, families, and tribes. It is the way we interact with our lands using our knowledge on our own terms. So it's everything. It's the way that we interact with our cultures, the way that we do ceremonies, it's the way that we protect the environment because we are the environment and the land is us. So we have the important job of protecting our Indigenous lands, our Indigenous homelands. Traditional ecological knowledge too is inherently collaborative. So we collaborate across different tribal spaces. We collaborate with each other. We collaborate with non-native allies. It's really important to understand that it is a holistic effort towards traditional ecological knowledge. And also something that I like to point out to my students when I'm talking about traditional ecological knowledge is that it does not follow a one size fits all model. So you can't take something from Hupa territory and then place it in the Sacramento Valley because our knowledges are based in our land and our place. And it's really, really important to for environmental scientists, non-native environmental scientists, native allies to understand that something that you learn from one tribe cannot just be placed into another land or ecological space. It really matters to have a very close tie and relationship with the tribes that you're working with on traditional ecological knowledge projects. So that's something that I like to point out as well, that we are very different from each other. In California, there's over 200 different tribal groups that interact with their lands and their space and have different relationships. So for this series, we'll be talking about many different facets of traditional ecological knowledge. And though we parceled them out into different sections, so we're talking about fire management, rivers and fish, estuaries, oceans. I put deserts in there because I think it's important to also acknowledge that a desert landscape is a part of traditional ecological knowledge, even though we don't necessarily get into that in the webinar. But something I also like to point out with traditional ecological knowledge is that these things all inform each other. So fire management is not just fire management, it's water management. It's forest management. It's land man. It's not even management. It's a relationship and a collaboration between these spaces and the ways and the practices in which we've done for since time immemorial. So we as Indigenous people have been doing this, interacting with our lands since time immemorial. And these practices have been passed down to us from generation to generation. So it's really important to understand that you can't just take fire and only see it as fire. It really matters in the way that interacts with the whole ecology of the landscape. But as we know in Western science, sometimes you get that parceling out. So when you work in laws and environmental policies, sometimes those things are parceled out between Department of Fire Management or the Department of Water Resources. And that kind of parceling out is in conflict with the ways in which Indigenous people think about land as being a holistic viewpoint. And so I don't think you can talk about traditional ecological knowledge as well without talking about the violence that California Indian people have faced in the state. So starting in 1769 with the establishment of the Spanish mission systems up into the present day, we are still combating environmental destruction and the genocide that was enacted upon us through settler colonialism. And so people think about the California Indian genocide through acts of massacres, of sexual violence, of boarding schools, of all these things that assimilation, of the things that we did go through and still continue to go through into the present day through settler colonialism and colonization. But something that's not often discussed, at least in narratives relating to the genocide of California Indian people, is the destruction of our environment. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a picture of hydraulic mining, and hydraulic mining was really prolific across the state in the mountainsides. And if you don't know what hydraulic mining is, it is the way in which gold miners essentially blasted out mountainsides and in the search for gold. So it's ecologically really devastating, and we're still dealing with the effects of mining on indigenous lands, mercury, things like that. And then on the right-hand side, and I apologize if this photograph is triggering for people, it's really a devastating photograph, is a photo of the 2002 salmon fish kill that occurred on the Klamath River Basin. And so every year, the tribes on the North Coast, Hupa, Yurok, Karuk, other Klamath, other tribes as well, advocate for more water allocations out onto the Klamath so that these fish kills don't happen. But the issue is that we have to advocate for these things every year. Like there's no systematic solution for the Klamath River, even though this is now changing with the new agreements that came out over the last fall in 2020. But the point that I want to make is that environmental destruction is a part of the California Indian genocide, and it's really important to discuss as this was a way of violence against Native people because of our ties to land, because of our inherent relationship with our land and with our place, this violence that was enacted over natural resources allocation and the warping and distortion of the environment was a violence against Native people, was and is still a violence against Native people. But I don't want to end on a kind of difficult note, even though it's a reality that we face. I do want to talk about the traditional ecological knowledge that we enact today and that we collaborate on with non-Native allies, environmental scientists, and people who are really invested in helping Indigenous people both return their lands and also steward them in a way that is conductive to our own culture and our knowledge. So on the left-hand side, this is a much younger me when I was maybe more young and vibrant. Back in 2013, I did a Woven with Our Roots basketry retreat with the Native Women's Collective that's headed by Dr. Kutcher Risling-Baldy at Humboldt State University. And that was one of the first times that I had ever really interacted with basketry. You know, I didn't necessarily come from a traditional ecological knowledge family or a family that had that generational passing down, but I really have benefited from learning from my friends and my tribe in how to consider basketry materials as an important source of both the land and our cultural knowledge. And so that was a great experience. I'm not a good basket weaver, but you know, you got to try, or at least attempt to try. And then on the right-hand side is Vicki Preston, who's of the Karuk tribe, and she is in process of doing a cultural burn and a prescribed burn. And the Karuk tribe has really been a leader in cultural burns in the area, and we'll hear more about that in this webinar series as we go along. But so that's just the very brief introduction into traditional ecological knowledge. We'll get more into things as we move along in this webinar series. I just want to thank you for having me and letting me do like this brief 10-minute talk. And so I'm going to pass it over to Sibyl and Ron and have them go into their presentation. Thank you so much.
Great. Is it okay to share my screen? Do that. Let's see. Ron, feel free to jump in here as I get the technology going. Here we go.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Brittani, thank you very much for the introduction. It's a wonderful time, wonderful place. You know, I really feel privileged to be talking about the two knowledge institutions here today, Indigenous science and Western science. You know, those institutions are a part of, one of those institutions, or both, I should say, is a part of my life. But I come from a very traditional family, and my first memories were gathering traditional foods and ceremonies. And so that's one of the things that I think is the reason why I'm here today. I was raised by a woman. I'm pretty tough because of that. And I think that, you know, I heard a series, you know, on toxic masculinity, and I couldn't help but think about talking about when they started talking about, you know, the kids being in the sweat houses. And to me, I never left the woman's sweat house. So I kind of like was able to gain that strength. But, you know, nowadays we don't have our kids in a woman's sweat house long enough. So I think that leads to toxic masculinity. And I think I just really need to say that real quick. But anyway, this is me. I'm, again, Ron Reed, Karuk tribal member. That's my colonial name. Imkacha has been a name given to me by the family of Daisy Jacobs and the ceremonies I preside over today. So it's kind of like everything's coming back around in short order for me. And thanks for having me here today. And we've been able to do a lot with traditional knowledge. You know, it's a place-based management theory or place-based management lifestyle. So all those things are attributed to our ceremonies, our creation stories, and all the impacts thereof. So next slide.
Let's see. Oh, good.
Yeah, so the Karuk land management historical timeline is kind of like goes to the theory of you need to know where you've been before you can go where you need to be. So it's kind of like this gives us a good look at how things were managed back in the day up to this point. And if you can see up in the themes up at the top a little bit, you can really, if you squint, you can see fire, fish and wildlife, forests and plants, land claims, et cetera, et cetera. So we kind of did exhaustive effort of trying to figure out what the Karuk people were going through at that time and what legislative impacts had and the social impacts to our people. Sibyl, do you have anything you can add to that?
Ron, this is amazing. And I wanted to just add that it was a real honor to be part of this. And I learned so much from you in doing this, this timeline. The ideas that I think we brought together with the multiple knowledge systems was that there is so much knowledge on the river, community knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, and coming from the academic perspective myself, just learning about the river and meeting people, it was an awesome way to get introduced to building relationships on the river, and to also create this community research output where we were linking the federal and state policy decisions, the land management actions, and the community health impacts. So we could begin to take all of the rich knowledge that people had, like Ron said, about where people have been, and to put this in a visual where people could see the broader story of systemic racism that's really built into land management today, alongside the community response to that racism, which is something that's been such an inspiration for me as a guest coming up and learning from you, and just seeing that long history of tribal knowledge and tribal action. Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, I would just like to add to that. I would just like to say that, you know, we brought the, you know, that was our first real attempt to bring in tribal community in and actually putting them in the scoping process. What did your family go through? So this is a very good a template or a timeline that anybody can use to figure out how their family tree was affected, you know, in a formal way. All right.
Good.
Yeah, so, you know, really, I got a job with the Karuk tribe in 1996, right after I made medicine into world renewal. So I'm a retired world renewal priest. And so that's the reason why I got my job with the Karuk Department of Natural Resources. And so I was able to use my traditional knowledge, my indigenous background, to be able to address management issues in the paradigm that I was, put into. So that worked very well. I was a tribal lead in the hydroelectric dam relicensing process, tribal lead in the Fish and Water Commission, the Tribal Fish and Water Commission, and things like that. So my feet were deeply entrenched into the management paradigm, using traditional knowledge as my voice, as my source of knowledge, because I wasn't raised in a Karuk speaking household, but I was raised in a indigenous science household. So that's a lot. And, so on the other, to the right, the fish kill, we was catching a lot of fish before that fish kill. And now I'm catching less than 50 fish in a year for the last 4 years. So that's the second largest tribe in California. We're a federally recognized tribe. And yet we do not have, so there's a lot of things that we're fighting for as the Karuk people. And I'll just leave it at that. And, the advocacy part is, you don't have the resources, you don't have the ethnographic ability to go and manage and harvest and things like that. The best thing you do is become an advocate. The best thing you do is show up on somebody's step and tell them why this is a bad idea. And we've been very successful at that. And during that process, in the dam relicensing, Klamath River dam relicensing process, I met a wonderful lady named Dr. Cary Norgaard. And when we met, she had already had a good idea of the things I talked about in the past. And she put a scientific niche to it, to where they really had to listen to us. And really what it was is that they had to listen to all the accusations we had in the effects of the altered diet on the health of the Karuk people. And you can see off to the right there, all the different impacts. That's very well known, so those are the importance of being able to have traditional knowledge or indigenous science in a compatibility level, in a true and disciplinary process that allows indigenous science the same amount of weight as you would for Western science. So that's what we try to do with the information that we translate from Western science, from indigenous science, to come out with a compatibility that, again, it refers back to our ceremonies, is that we're fixed to world people, and all living things are at the subject of our prayers. So it makes a lot of sense to be able to utilize traditional knowledge in a management paradigm today. And this is a very important cultural beneficial uses of water in the Karuk tribe. So basically, at the end of the hydroelectric relicensing process, where I spent 1 week every month for 5 years, pouring out my guts, basically what this chart says. And basically, the river is more than the river. The fish is more than a fish. There's spiritual connections. There's mental health issues associated with it. All these different things that I think we're in a process of defining as we speak. And this is a process that, at the end of that process, where there's no cultural impact below the project area, which was Iron Gate Dam, we spun it into environmental justice mode. And so Environmental Justice Coalition for Water Down Oakland, I started collaborating with them, using indigenous science and traditional knowledge, and using their platform to get to the governor's office, or to Cal EPA, who was able to submit this document that basically says that the Klamath River is important to us all year round. And it's a very important document that I think is still being utilized today in a great way. Sibyl?
Ron, I just appreciate all your work on this, because, as I learn about these issues from the technical side and from the policy side, and learn the background behind, how much of Karuk knowledge was really shaping these policies, it's a real inspiration. And I'll just add a tiny bit of background about how the Clean Water Act is set up so that we create these beneficial uses as a way to set goals for water protection for particular waters, for particular ways that the communities in a place use those waters. And so there's beneficial uses for recreation and agriculture and for endangered species, but what about culture? And I was really shocked to hear the story of how the Ron and others from the Karuk tribe were, negotiating through a state-led process to determine, well, what are the impacts to the river, and what kind of repair needs to happen to that river. And when beneficial uses came up, what I heard from my colleagues on the for tribal managers was that from the agency perspective, the cultural use was limited to a 2-week ceremonial period. And so this is just an amazing amount of work that, Ron, you and your mother and Frank Lake did to say, well, wait a second, we need to do some education here. And I know that education work is a big burden. So I want to acknowledge that, but just say how much I appreciate the work that you did to set out. Cultural use happens, all the time and in so many different ways. And I was so impressed at how the Karuk tribe, brought this into management and into policy, and that it's now the way that the North Coast Regional Water Board sets its policies on the Klamath, and that this policy has then been brought up to the state level. So kudos for your impact work, Ron, and others. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess, this comes right back to, dam removal. That's the reason why, and it has a devastating impact. I mean, the fish kill is a big result of these dams. It's a spring-fed system. That should be clean, pure water flowing down through the river. And yet we have all these advocates that says this is going to kill the system. And, it's kind of like the same thing that they talk about fire. They demonize indigenous science to a point where scientific evidence does not even disprove the momentum of the trajectory of management paradigm in this patriarchal society we live in today. So Sibyl, do you have anything to say about this? I think this is a good point you can make.
I think you said it, that that there's so much at stake, that this is sort of a toxic algae example that you and others have shared of what it means when we don't take care of the river, and how important it is for tribal communities who are living on the river to be doing a lot of the science where no one else is doing the scientific monitoring in the mid-Klamath. So you've got 120 miles of river where the Karuk tribe is the one that's testing the water to make sure it's safe, and that's advocating for water protection in this area. And so the scientific world is where a lot of that water protection happens. And so I really, Ron, appreciate the advocacy and that translation work that you're doing all along the way. And I'll pass it to you to close.
Yeah, so, Yotwa, this is, me being a father, a husband, a father, a grandfather. I can really relate to those people right there in front of me on the screen. I wish it was in color because, it really tells you the magnificence of the regalia. But each regalia item has a story, a management history, and something has connected back to geologic time. These are the things that was stripped from us in the forced assimilation era of this great country we live in. And now everything that was stripped, I am from the Charlie Davis family. And on one side of that family, there was an Indian doctor. On the other side, there was a medicine man. So there was a lot of knowledge that got stripped in a single generation from my mother to me. And it's because of forced assimilation. And those are the things that I fight desperately for today. I'm sending my kids to school to deal with these issues under the world renewal perspective. So I know we're out of time and there's plenty to talk about. There'll always be plenty to talk about. We're talking about indigenous science. But just remember, it is a place-based science. It's a place-based religion. There's place-based management actions. And indigenous culture was across this great nation. So we need to mimic nature and the indigenous science to be able to address the issues that are with us today at this time when we need solutions. So I thank you very much for giving me this great opportunity, and Yotwa.